Thanks for rejoining the project. We were looking last lesson at the ways you could extract some of that basic data and do a simple player evaluation. So we created a dynamic little report here where you simply selected the match you were interested in, chose the player name, and then decided how you wanted to reference that data. So we had 4 different options that we looked at: match average, position match average, player average, or opponent average, and you could select whichever one you wanted from these drop down boxes. So we're going to continue that process of player evaluation. We're going to look a little bit deeper into their performance and see what their form has been like leading into the match. And so I've just decided that we're going to do 5 matches. So to help us, simply going to type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in that column. And what we want to be able to extract is the selected match, but also the 4 previous selected matches. And that takes a little bit of thinking about. When we created our list of matches, and if we click this drop down box here, you can see that we have got them alphabetized because we used a pivot table to extract them. Now that's not particularly helpful if we're looking at form and looking at matches in sequence. So I'm going to go back to the database and show you the way that I would normally extract the matches in sequence. Over on the side here we've got UI match here, and so that's the column that I want to do an advanced filter on. So with the cursor clicked in AB7, keyboard shortcut Control Shift down arrow selects that entire column. I'm just going to scroll across a little bit. Up on the data tab we have advanced filter as a button we can select. The wizard appears, it says what would we like to do. I want to copy to a new location, tick the box that says unique records only, and under copy to I'm just going to select a cell up the top here and click OK. And if we select all of those matches there, we can see that they're now in the order that they appear in the table, and that's a lot better. I'm actually just going to leave that heading and select all the results, go to my config panel, and I'm just going to paste over the top of this. So the list is the exact same size, and you can see it's still being identified by that named range called list matches, but now they are in order of when they occurred. And the reason that that is useful, if we go back to our match report, is that can allow us to say, well, we know the match that's been selected, so let's extract out the previous 4 now. So we can do that with a simple match of our selected game. We've got a list called list of matches. Pretty simple really. It says that this match is our 3rd in the list. Let's check that out. That's exactly right. Let's go further down and we can see that this one's the 8th one in our list. And so because we know that, I can simply type this -1. And if I drag that up, that'll just keep counting down by 1. Bit of auditing will tell us if that's true. Great. And so we now have the match row identified. And so we know what this one is now. Let's use an index function to extract out the match name for these previous 4 games, just because it'll be useful for us to simplify a few of the formulas. We've got a list called list matches, and we've got a row number, so it should be fairly easy for us to just type a formula and drag it up. So they're the 4 previous games, and if I change this just to check, we can see that those ones pick up the differences. So now if I'm trying to find out whereabouts this particular player's data is in the database sheet, what I can do is combine the player name with the match that we have just extracted to look for their particular row of data. Remembering that we've got a column here called UI player, and that has the format of player name dash and then the match. So once again, the match tells us that. What do we want to look up? Player name. We need to use a dash and put it in quotes because we have a dash in our database table, and it will be expecting that when we do a search. I don't want to lock the second part of the formula down because as I drag up, I want the player name to stay still in J4 but not the match name. We're looking it up in a table called TBL data, and if I scroll this list right to the bottom, we'll find that there's UI player as a field name. And now because we have done that clever little join at the beginning with the ampersand and the dash in the middle and so on, we have to do an array formula. Control-Shift-Enter allows us to do that. And if you look in the formula bar, you can see that there are curly brackets around that formula, which means it is an array. Now, if you're not familiar with this formula and a few of the other things that I've already demonstrated in this video, then there's a couple of good options for you. One of them is to check out some of my other videos, and you'll find a little bit of example of things like index and match and VLOOKUP and so on. The other thing is, if this sort of stuff is interesting to you, then you might want to have a look at this course there that you can find on the videoanalyst.com. But either way, to be able to do projects like this is going to require you to really not have to think too much when you're trying to do indexes and match and other types of lookup. Alright, let's get on with it. Drag that up, and we can see that we've now got the row in the database that contains data for each of these 5 matches. Index function will do that for us. The table is always going to be TBL data. We are pulling it out, in this case for the opponent, and we have the row number. If I close that bracket, I can drag it down. And we can do a little check. We can see that it goes Brazil, Paraguay, Brazil, Germany, France, and that is how the table has extracted it. So it's looking pretty good. We can drag this across. Gonna have to do a bit of editing. Didn't do a good job of that. I should have locked that R so it didn't copy over. It's pretty easy to change there just with a $sign in front, but instead of event I want date. The format's going to be wrong because we dragged it from a different formatted field. We can now just choose short date. I might do a custom date. Control 1 on the keyboard opens up the format cells dialog box, and under custom what I'd like to do is just take away those 2 extra year items so it just shows 16 instead of 2016, and therefore it fits a little bit more tidily. If I drag this all the way over, it's not going to give us what we want, but just a little bit of quick editing and I can populate that whole thing out. I'm just going to do the events one, and offline I'll fix all the other ones up. So let's look at the events field. Don't be fooled that it says event. We actually want events, and we want to change that to a number and copy that. And similarly, total is really just a matter of going into the field, selecting overall points, changing the format to number, sending it down. Actually, I'll leave 1 decimal place in there just in case that is relevant. And so with a little bit of tidying up, what we have is the current match and the 4 previous matches. So we've got a little bit of a window into their form. If we choose a different player on this list, then all these things update and we can see that the data changes. And so that's positive. That's what we wanted to see. And it's really allowing us to then choose, like we have over here on the left, how we might want to represent that in a chart. So what I want to do is allow any of these items to be selected and shown on a chart. There's a few ways you can do it. The simplest way is just a drop-down box, but let's be a little bit clever here, even if it's not really required. I'm going to put all my workings on the current sheet so that you can kind of make the connections. Normally I'd hide them away, but I don't want to confuse you. Let's just do transpose values here. And so we've got this little list of options. And I'm going to give it a title called chart options. And if I select all of it and say insert pivot table on an existing worksheet right next door, it builds this completely unnecessary pivot table for me. I've only got one item in it, and inside the design tab I'm going to turn off grand total, and also inside it I'm going to insert a slicer. Alright, so we've got now the ability to select one of our options. So you can have a nice little interactive chart even without using pivot charts, because I know they don't work on a Mac, and so I don't want that causing problems for you. So we've got the ability now to select that, and as long as you only select one, whatever is in cell AE2 is going to be our selected option. So I'm going to put a little heading there, and I'm going to say equals this one here. Alright, so we've got carry there. Actually, why don't I do a second one as well? I can call this first one display 1 and the second one display 2. So now I just really need to look in the table. If I lock that with the F4, and I need to use, it's probably easy just to type that in because there's only a few rows. We're looking for the answer in row 2, and what we want is the match function to help us find where our selected option, in this case carry, falls in this list here. Drag that down and just quickly update that manually. Normally I'd write a formula to do this, and I'll actually do the formula in the next cell just to show you that it's a bit easier. So what I need to do is replace this 2 with a function called rows. And as I copy that down, it just expands out to 3, 4, 5, and 6. So we've now got our 2 options. Now philosophically, a line chart is a better option because you're dealing with time series data. The problem with that for me is that I don't think it looks as good. So I tend to throw philosophy out the window and do what I think looks best, or what my coach wants to look at. So I'm going to show you both a line and a bar chart. You need to tidy these charts up. By putting our axis labels on there. Same for the second one, select data. Alright, so let's just check out, if we can, what happens when we change the player name. Okay, so we can see their form lines are changing. Perfect, that's what we wanted. And we can just have a little look at whether the slicer is working for us. So let's choose pass, and with the control button held down, tackle. Okay, so that's working as well. So we've got now some form data showing on the sheet. We've talked a little bit before about how reference data makes the value of this information even greater. So what I want to do is continue that theme and show you that you could put some reference data with this current data to make it even better. And so what would that look like? Well, that's up to you. We demonstrated on the example last video that you could put in all sorts of different reference data and be justified in doing so. So match average or position match average and so on. Whereas for player form, let's try something else. And to facilitate some of the analysis, what I have created on the config page are two small tables. The first is called position averages and the second is called position targets. Now the averages is just looking into the data set to find out what the current average is, and the second one is what the coach thinks is a fair benchmark for each position. And so to make them easy to work with, I'm going to name these ranges. So including the headings, I'm going to call this table position averages, and similarly below. Table position targets. And what that allows me to do on my match report 2 page is extract those items out. And so if you have a look inside these formula, it's just looking to those 2 new reference tables we just created and extracting out the position average for this player. Now we know their position because it was selected over here when we chose the player name. It pulled out their position. So we can use that to help us extract out. So we've got this data set now. Now I'm going to do it for the right hand of the 2 charts because I think it works quite nicely with this style of chart. First thing, just tidy this chart up. I like it being a little bit thicker. And now what I want to add, by right clicking and choosing select data, I can add 2 new series to it. What's the series name going to be? I call it position average, and the data is here. Add a second one. I could call it target or benchmark. I think I'll stick with the terminology I used before, which was target. This time I put number 10 in there. Right, at the moment that's not helping us a lot, so I want to change how that looks. So this is our position average data. Choose change series chart type. I believe this is best as a line, and likewise this one is a line. That makes those bars go back to their original thickness, which is good. And if I just format that a little bit, I would probably take away the markers and make the line a bit thinner and dashed. Possibly black would be better. And this one, not taking a lot of care on this, but obviously you could. There we go. So we've now got things looking a little bit better. I need to add a chart title, and I need to add a legend, which I can put anywhere I like. I prefer the bottom. We need a little bit more space in our chart now, but nevertheless we can see what's going on. Let's put a chart title in place. I'm going to reference against just an empty cell for now, which is V1. And over here I'm going to type something. There we go. So I've now used just a little joined up text string to be our title, and that'll update when we choose a different player or a different item. We've got our, I guess, band here. We can see that for the most part Scott is above the position average, but not quite at the position target. There was only one game versus Brazil where he wasn't above the team average. So you could say that his form is relatively steady and that he is somewhere between the position average and the position benchmark. Let's see what happens if we change what variables we're looking at. We can see here that for the number of events that he's involved in, he's below both the position average and the position target. Anyway, basically what I did there is I just overlaid those lines, made them a little bit less conspicuous, and therefore you've now got some reference to draw conclusions from. We have compared here a player's performance across a few different metrics against position average or a position target. Another way that you can reference an individual's performance is by looking at their own historic performance. So you could find out, compared to how they normally perform, how did they perform in this match? And the way that you'd do that would be using a Z-score. So I've done a little bit of work already. I don't want to take you through the whole process because it's reasonably lengthy, but I want to demonstrate how I've done it. And so initially what I have done is look at a Z-score simply for this player against all opponents. And if we look in this formula here, we've got our normal column headings, and underneath it we've got the mean. Now this is just a simple average if. If player is selected, then we want to do an average of events. So that's a pretty easy formula, hopefully. And I've replicated that all the way across for the other areas as well. But to get a Z-score, you need a standard deviation. And this is a little bit more complicated. And so in this blue cell here, I'm going to write a standard deviation calculation. It's not a normal standard deviation. It is a standard deviation with a condition. And so as you saw above, we've got something called average if. Unfortunately, there is no formula called standard deviation if. And so therefore we have to be a little bit clever. And this formula is a bit tricky. And so the formula looks like this. If I type standard deviation, you can see that there's quite a lot of different options. And the fifth option there, standard dev, is kind of a bit outdated now, and Excel is trying to discourage you from using this option. That's why there's a yellow triangle. If we magnified that, it would show a little sort of warning sign. What I'm going to do instead is use standard deviation S. Now once we're in standard deviation, we would normally just select a group of cells, but this is where we have to write an if function, and that if function looks like this. If the player field equals whatever's in J4, and that's the player name selection, I lock that with the F4 key. Then what do we want to do? We want to include the events field, and that's it. There's no false. We don't want it to do anything if there's no match to the player. So we just have to close brackets twice and do Control-Shift-Enter to make it an array. And if we do so, it's going to calculate a player-specific standard deviation for events. Something that's quite wise to do is to put if error at the front and double commas at the end, because in the case of standard deviation, if there's only one match for a particular player, that's not enough to calculate standard deviation. And although this wouldn't be the case here, it will be the case in our second example. And so before I move to that second example, I'm just going to demonstrate that I've filled this in for all the other fields. Same formula, standard deviation if a particular player is selected. Now I've just put a link here, which is to an excellent Excel video relating to array formulas. The person that made this video is probably the best YouTube Excel blogger out there, and it's who I've learned most of my stuff from. So check it out if you don't know much about arrays. Just on the right here, what I've done is I've extracted out the item that has been selected in display 1. So that's our line chart here that currently says carry. And so that data has been extracted out. I've used a lookup function to pull in the mean. I've used a lookup function to pull in the standard deviation, and I've used a built-in function called standardize to calculate the z-score. Now we could, if we wanted to, plot that z-score. Something like a column chart would work. And I would simply select data and add the matches. And so the matches, we would look at something like this here. Because we've got positive and negative, the chart looks a little bit ugly with the bars going through all the negative ones. But nevertheless, we've got that little z-score chart in place if we wanted to just look at it that way. However, I think there's much more interesting stuff you can do with it, because I'm actually interested in how they performed, but I also want to know the z-score. So there's a combination I'm looking for here. And what I did across on the right hand side is I created a little lookup table that says if the score is anything between -5 and -1, then they performed worse than expected. If it's anything between -1 and 1, then they get the horizontal arrow, which means about the same. And if it's greater than 1, it means they perform better than expected. And so I did a VLOOKUP that simply looked in this table. And there's nothing particularly special about that VLOOKUP other than the fact that it's got a true at the end. And a true means it does an approximate lookup. What I can now do with that, so I could right click on this chart and add data labels. Then right click on those data labels and format them. If I choose this option here that says value from cells, a wizard appears and it's asking me where are these values. I can select my arrows and click OK, and you can see on the chart there we've got that arrow now. I could leave the number on, so it's got both an arrow and a number, or I could take away the value. And so now what we've got here is a chart that's got downwards, horizontal or upwards arrows showing that it was better or worse than expected. The second example is exactly the same, it's just a little bit more complex in that it's also got specific opponent z-scores. So if we look inside the formula for standard deviation, we can see that there is two if equations. The first one is where the player matches, and the second one is where the opponent matches. So both the average if and the standard deviation if have double criteria this time. Otherwise it's exactly the same. We've got our calculations, we've got our arrows, and I could be placing those arrows up on the chart. What I've been trying to illustrate with this video is that when you've got some matched data, if you have a history of data recorded, you can do a variety of comparisons. You can compare against known data such as position averages or targets. Plus you can also compare against their own history and get that expected performance relationship. I've got one more video to go in this series where I want to look at how you can do some analysis while coding live. So when we're on this page, what could we be looking at while we're coding to help us out? And also how to tie in team performance to the work we've already done.